While most people do understand the importance of side movements in dressage, I do think there are some important elements that people often miss about what makes a good side movement a good side movement. This is so important because side movements form the basis for making the horse more supple and more collected later on. So in this video, I would like to explain what makes a good side movement for me, how to improve your side movement with your horse, and what most people miss about what makes a side movement good. If you're new here, my name is Hartogsveld. I'm a classical riding instructor, and my passion is to help people with their horses and their dressage. So to start with, I'd just like to give you an overview of the different side movements we have. That is shoulder in, where the shoulders are taken more in, the travers or the haunches in, where the hind legs are taken more in, the renvers or the haunches out, where the hind legs are taken more out, and the shoulder out, where the shoulders are taken more out. So I think what is important to realize is that there's two principles that we can vary over time when we're talking about side movements. When we're talking about side movements, one of the most important things we can vary is how sideways we are going. Meaning that on a straight line on the shoulder in, for example, we can go very little sideways. This is also referred to a 3-track shoulder in, which essentially means is that there's 3 tracks that the legs follow. One is the most inside track. This is the inside front leg. Then we have the middle track. This is the outside front leg and the inside hind leg. And then we have the outside track, and this is the outside hind leg. When we make this side movement a little bit more sideways, or also called oblique, then we get a 4-track shoulder in, meaning that the inside hind leg and the outside front leg are no longer on the same track. Now, this is more sideways, and on a straight line, this doesn't really change much other than that we're just going more sideways in a shoulder. If we're going completely sideways, something we see a little bit more often in the historical literature, then we will go on 2 tracks, meaning that the front legs and the hind legs have the same track, and that's it. Now, sideways is something that can change a little bit by exercise to exercise. So when we're going on a straight line, we can vary it from 3-track to 2-track, extremely sideways. But when we're going on a circle, we can vary compared to the amount of bend on the circle. So when we're talking about a large circle, for example, the bend is not that much, and so the horse can still go a little sideways. It can also go extremely sideways, like on a 2-track. Now on a smaller circle, however, because there's already a lot of bend involved, the kind of equivalent to a straight line would be a 4-track. So the horse can only go 4-track shoulder in on a very small circle, when we're talking about 6 meters or less. Now, this is important to realize because the sideways is therefore a little bit dependent on the direction that we are going. Now, direction is the second most important principle about side movements, but it can also alter some of the other properties of a side movement. So for example, it can alter the amount of sideways that we are going, like we saw before. Now, another thing that direction can alter is the side movement itself. So when we're thinking that we have a bent horse, when we go straight ahead, we will make a shoulder in. But when we are going across, then suddenly it's a half pass or a travers. If we go completely sideways, suddenly we do a 2-track renvers. Now it's important to say that I consider half pass a travers. It's the way that I execute my half pass. Not everyone does, but it's how I like to do things because it maintains the collection and the rhythm better. So the direction matters a lot, and this is oftentimes why people have trouble maintaining a side movement on a circle in the beginning. Oftentimes when they try, for example, shoulder in, they make the circle a little bit larger and a little bit smaller at places, or oftentimes the horse is not in balance enough. And that means that they end up in a travers circle suddenly, even though they didn't intend to do that. So it's quite important to realize that the direction plays a big role in these things. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that a change in direction always leads to a different side movement. For example, we can make the circle bigger in a shoulder in, or we can make the circle smaller in a travers. We can make the circle smaller in a renvers also. It really depends on what kind of direction change we are introducing. Now, this kind of brings us to the third important principle about side movements. Side movements are not connected to one particular exercise. It's not that shouldering is always done at the wall on a straight line. Sure, we can also do circles, but we can do so much more. We can make the circle bigger or smaller, or go in a variety of different directions while keeping the side movement. In fact, we can also change the direction a little bit, but keep the amount of sideways the same. Now, why is this so important? Well, it's important to realize because side movements are a kind of a posture that we maintain in the horse while doing the exercise. How most people start the shoulder in is next to the wall. They use a little bit of inside rein and they use a little bit of inside leg to make the horse go sideways, and the wall prevents the horse from falling out. This is why most people have so much trouble when we're moving towards a circle, because there's no wall to keep the horse onto the circle. Oftentimes the horse kind of spirals out over the shoulder, or it has the croup too far out. So on a circle we might realize that we need more outside aids to keep the horse a little bit more in on the circle. However, we might not realize all aspects of this. When we do a spiraling inwards in a shoulder in, we suddenly realize that we need much more control over the shoulders and the hind legs to do that particular exercise. The same goes for squares when we do sort of a quarter pirouette in shoulder in, which is a very important exercise and is often overlooked. Oftentimes when people refer to pirouette, they always think about the travers pirouette, but a shoulder in pirouette is just as important. It's a very hard exercise to do, and an exercise that the horse quickly falls on the shoulder with, and this is also something we see in the historical literature. But it makes the rider realize that they need a lot more control over the hind legs to position them properly to make the exercise correctly. Now, oftentimes what we see is that the hind legs step too big for the horse, which means that a lot of the weight can't be put on the hind leg. The hind leg can't be bent because it's out of position. It's put outwards from the center of balance of the horse. Oftentimes then the result is that the horse falls more on the front, and that's kind of what we want to prevent. Now, if you don't do squares, if you don't do quarter pirouettes, if you don't do full pirouettes in shouldering, you don't realize these things, and you don't realize the amount of detail that is necessary to properly position the body of the horse. Now, this depends a little bit from horse to horse as well. Horses with a narrow chest and the front legs more close together have more trouble balancing compared to a horse with a wider chest where the front legs are further apart. This means that the range of what is acceptable to stay in balance for a horse with a wider chest is a little bit greater compared to a horse with a narrow chest. The same goes for the hind legs and a number of different other physical attributes to the horse. So hopefully you can see that these exercises are not necessarily just connected to a straight line or maybe a circle. It's a whole range of exercises that is important to do and to practice also with your horse. This whole range gives you more control over where you can position each leg, but also gives the horse a lot more balance and a lot more control over their own body. It's important to vary these exercises to make the horse more supple in different directions and different amounts of sideways, but also to get the horse more collected over time. For example, pirouettes, especially around the front, but also in renvers, are very important to make the horse more collected over time because they're kind of a natural transition to something like piaffe. Oftentimes people start with piaffe kind of out of the blue. The horse doesn't have a lot of experience with bending the hind legs, and so piaffe is a very important but very difficult exercise for them. However, when you do a lot more pirouettes and a lot more side movements on smaller circles in different directions, you build up kind of the capacity of the horse and the strength of the horse to do things like piaffe later on much better. For example, you can see in a pirouette that the front legs stay on the same place and the hind legs go a limited amount. This is to keep the horse more on the hind legs. They have to bend their hind legs a little bit more, and they can't make super big steps. So this is an ideal transition to something like a piaffe, where both the front and the back stays on the same place. So I'd like to conclude with giving you some practical advice on how to improve these side movements at home. I think the first step is to practice more directions, to practice more varieties. So start introducing something like making the circle smaller or making the circle bigger, something like a spiral. Maybe introduce a serpentine in your side movement work. Maybe play a little bit in which direction you are going. When you do something like half pass, make it a little bit more towards the middle of the arena instead of the end of the arena. I think the most important advice I can give you is start to think about side movements not as connected to a particular exercise, but something you can do at any point in any direction. Play with it a little bit and identify what side movements is this when I go a little bit more to the right, when I make the circle a little bit bigger. Do I end up in a different side movement or do I end up in a more sideways variant? The second piece of advice is try to vary the amount of sideways that you're going. Don't always go for the same amount of sideways, but try to go a little bit more sideways on a straight line or a little bit less sideways on a curved line. See what it does to the horse. See where the line kind of is with their body, what they find comfortable and what they find challenging. Of course, there's always a two sideways, but you have to kind of find out with your horse where that point is for their particular body. Maybe you have a horse with quite a narrow chest, and so the position that the shoulders have to be in the shouldering is very limited. If the shoulders go a little bit further sideways, then suddenly they lose balance. Or maybe your horse is quite comfortable with going more sideways, and it will give you a little bit more control over the suppleness of the shoulders, and it might give you more in your training overall. So I hope you enjoyed today's video and you learned something about side movements. If you have any questions, please comment them down below. I'm always there to answer any possible questions, and I will see you next video. Bye bye.